In the modern age of mis- and disinformation, the battle for public opinion and consumer choice is dominated by the digital realm, where governments and corporations employ a subtle but potent arsenal of psychic techniques for various nefarious purposes. These techniques, rooted in scientifically verifiable psychological phenomena, serve as tools for manipulating human actions, often without the individuals that they are designed to influence ever even realizing. Call it suggestion, mass manipulation, or the social engineering of behavior, this type of black magic voodoo often flies well under the radar of the average normie mind, and is left almost exclusively as the preserve of intelligence agencies, black marketeers, and sleazy advertisers. Edward Louis Bernays, an American theorist and nephew of famous psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, is today considered a pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda. Bernays' best-known ad campaigns include a 1929 effort to promote female smoking by rebranding cigarettes as feminist torches of freedom, and his later work for the United Fruit Company in the 1950s, connected with a sketchy CIA-orchestrated plan to topple the democratically elected government of Guatemala. Much of Bernays' writing and work focused on the herd mentality and irrational biases of the public. He liked how Le Bon's crowd psychology and Freud's psychoanalysis worked, and sought to use these tools to influence people's perception.
What led you, more than 60 years ago, to see the need for public relations?
I was a member of the United States Committee on Public Information in World War I, and I worked with the committee to make this the war to end all wars, which was Wilson's idea, and the war to make the world safe for democracy, and to popularize throughout the world the 14 points. And I found that ideas were weapons and were even more effective than bullets.
Is it any wonder then that the psychological techniques developed by Bernays are considered so mainstream in the arenas of politics and marketing today? Or that his own great nephew, one Mark Bernays Randolph, is today the CEO of a little company called Netflix?
Option. A negative option, of course, is very common now. Negative option is that you sign up, and unless you cancel actively, we automatically keep billing your credit card every month.
Right, like the gyms do.
Yeah, exactly. Like almost every subscription service does. Reed was thinking, that is so scammy. That is so sleazy. That is borderline illegal. And I'm going, every single magazine in the world works that way. Almost every single other continuity program in the world works like that way. It doesn't have to be sleazy. You can be upfront. You can make it easy to cancel. But just let's just assume they're going to like it, rather than assume that they're not going to like it. And to my credit, I managed to convince him to test that, and that's the test that blew the doors off.
Confirmation bias, or the tendency to seek out information that aligns with beliefs we already hold, is the cornerstone of the common everyday PsyOp. Governments and corporations regularly utilize this phenomena by tailoring messages to match content that their intended audiences already consume. In recent years, it has been made possible through the internet to filter the content an individual enjoys, catering only to their pre-existing preferences. Of course, we all know that social media algorithms are notorious for reinforcing users' existing biases and for creating echo chambers that strengthen the beliefs we already hold, but increasingly, it is becoming possible for third-party organizations to incept totally novel beliefs, even desires, into parts of the public unconscious simply by associating them with popular people, images, or ideals. For instance, A politically motivated individual may already encounter a news feed full of articles and content that reaffirms their political perspective. Advertisers, though, wise to the idea that everyone is more likely to buy from what they believe to be a politically aligned brand and flush with consumer data bought from telecom companies spying on you, can now target you directly through your content of choice. It has always been possible for a company to market the same product to two entirely different audiences, even in two completely unique territories. The difference today, though, is that there's no cost or time effort involved in doing so. We are so socially segregated today via the internet that we may never even come into contact with a conflicting or opposing message. Whilst in the long term, this obviously only serves to further polarize society, in the short term, sensationalism sells and the results are undeniable. But what happens when your ideals don't fully align with the product or message that someone is trying to sell you? Cognitive dissonance, or the discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs simultaneously, can become a powerful tool in the right hands, especially when exploited by influential entities. Social engineers, people like marketeers, often use this phenomenon to depict a product, service, or even a political policy as an answer to a problem that an audience in many cases weren't even aware they had, often because in reality, they don't. By creating a dissonance between an idealized image of oneself and one's actual self, consumers are encouraged to make purchases to resolve their psychological discomfort. Of course, this technique is nothing new. It's been employed by snake oil salesmen since the beginning of time to market products that don't actually work as having miraculous effect. But these days, it's not just dietary supplements and skincare products capitalizing on the power of persuasion to suggest to consumers that their offerings might actually be genuinely effective. The British government, much like many of the governments in Western nations, understands the power of this effect completely, and now has a dedicated team, popularly known as the Nudge Unit, to apply what they've learned in recent years to the broader public. The British Nudge Unit was established in 2010 by then Prime Minister David Cameron to, quote, apply behavioral science insights to large-scale public decision-making. This is the team, by the way, that played an enormous role in helping the government facilitate and manage its response to the recent coronavirus pandemic. But what actually is a nudge unit, and what kind of people might we expect to find working on one?
The World Health Organization has just announced that Professor Susan Mickey of University College London is to take up a role as chair of their Technical Advisory Group on Behavioural Insights. As well as being one of the UK's leading academics on nudge, or behavioural insights theory, she is also a Communist Party member of 40 years standing. This is not a smear or a conspiracy talking point, it's a fact that she doesn't deny and that remains in every mainstream publication report about Professor Mickey.
Nudge theory is a concept in the fledgling field of behavioral economics that proposes designing decision environments or choice architectures as a way to influence behavior and decision making on a large scale. For example, in many countries, citizens are automatically assigned organ donor status and considered organ donors when they acquire a passport or driving license, whether they like it or not, unless they actively opt out. This default option obviously increases the number of organ donors significantly. Whilst the choice architecture of which brand of deodorant to buy might be a relatively simple one, the choice architecture behind which politician to vote for is significantly more complex. Or at least it used to be before the mass proliferation of data collection. Nudging contrasts with other more traditional ways of achieving large-scale social compliance, things like education, legislation, or just good old-fashioned enforcement. Of course, they don't actually call it nudging in the corridors of power. Behavioral insights, as it is more often termed, is today being used by governments and non-governmental supranational organizations to successfully improve outcomes on numerous public, program, and service areas. Everything from making sure that you don't litter to making sure that you pay your taxes on time and in full. The social influence exercised by governmental institutions fuels two more psychological phenomena, and they're profound: fundamental attribution errors and groupthink, both of which are harnessed not only just to build trust in the approved voices of authority, but also to create and control countercultural voices and opposing narratives. Fundamental attribution error is a type of cognitive bias. It refers to the tendency of individuals to attribute the behavior of others, to internal dispositional factors, things like personality traits or bad intentions, rather than considering external situational factors. Say someone cuts you up in traffic. You may assume that they're rude or aggressive by nature, but this would be a dispositional attribution. Rather, it might be better to consider that they're in a hurry due to an emergency, a situational attribution. Of course, both could be true, but this disregard for situational attribution is the exact same phenomenon that a government might use to create a scapegoat, to ruin a reputation, or to convince you that a harmless activist is in fact a terrorist. Both attribution errors and groupthink relate to how people think and behave in group settings, and both have significant implications for understanding human behavior in social context. Big tech, big pharma, big banking all already know this and have already adjusted their messaging accordingly. The bystander effect is another well-known psychological tool used to nudge every last inch of your predictable behavior into the desired direction. First popularized by a psychologist called John Darley in the 1960s, who observed that individuals are less likely to offer help or to intervene in an emergency situation when there are other people present, the phenomenon today means that the presence of a larger number of people, or bystanders, actually reduces the likelihood that any single one of them will take action or assist a person in distress. This means that if your government wants to lie to you, they're actually more likely to get away with it if the lie is bigger, if the lie is out in public and in full view of all of the other morons watching. After all, people are unlikely to stand up to each other, especially against authority and especially without further social prompting.
Really big thing that's done to brainwash people is if you have some really dark agenda, you basically wrap it in this hyper trendy cause. That's basically how you can get through any dark agenda that you want. You just gift wrap it in a trendy cause. You go, who believes in the trendy cause? And then everyone goes, yay! And then you even pick the people that are trying to actually do good. You frame them as the bad guys by cutting them out of context, put them in the media. And now the very people doing good things and trying to help, you can demonize. And the average person doesn't even want to look deeply enough into it. And they just jump on the trend. And you can basically just manipulate the masses like that. It's completely insane. And it's going on constantly. And
the strategic use of psychological techniques like those of Bernays' in power pervades today's world. Legislative changes, such as the 2013 amendment to the U.S. Smith-Mund Act, enable domestic dissemination of information, including that used in psychological operations that was previously restricted to foreign audiences, to be spread willy-nilly by alphabet soup agencies throughout the United States. Amid confirmation biases reinforcing your existing beliefs, dissonance shaping your social attitudes, and the placebo effect persuading you through perception of basically anything, it's actually quite surprising that any so-called citizen of any so-called free Western country has anything resembling an organic, independent thought these days. In our digital age, where information flows freely and social engineering is increasingly subtle and sly, understanding the psychological phenomenon that manipulate us from behind the scenes is vital for individuals to make informed decisions and navigate an ever-changing and ever-confusing messaging landscape. In order, though, to critically examine the messages that we receive, the products we consume, and the systems used to shape our behavior, we first have to become radically more cynical. In a world where everyday PsyOps are becoming ever sophisticated, the need for a vigilant and informed public has never been more critical. And, sadly, never been less likely.